Well, hello, everybody. This is Larry from the Blue Collar Nation podcast, and I'm here with my enduring business partner, Mr. Eric Sprague, the Tech Whisperer. What's happening, Eric?
I feel like I'm enduring today.
Yeah.
just getting through.
Yep. Some days are more of a challenge than others, and
That's right. That's part of life.
just like the rest of us, you got to make it happen, which is a beautiful thing.
Absolutely.
So the podcast today is sponsored, as many of you know, by Morning Tech Meeting. And Morning Tech Meeting, and I haven't used this one a lot, is a charm school for technicians.
Oh, you're just going back to your mom's thing?
The charms, my mom sent me to a charm school. It helped a whole lot.
Yeah, didn't work.
So if you want your technicians to be more charming and inspirational and relate and connect with your clients as if they went to charm school, join Morning Tech Meeting, because we will train them on soft skills. Eric, the Tech Whisperer, will train them on soft skills to connect, relate, understand why it's important to deal with people properly, why it's important to do all the things that make a difference in the connection with the client, because they're just as important as the technical aspect. So you need to train the non-technical aspect of the job to your technicians, and that will make a huge difference in your business day to day and overall for years. So back to the podcast. We have an amazing guest today we're very excited about. Leighton Healy, CEO of Know How. He's also the creator of the Restoration Workforce Survey, which we'll get into today. And we are so happy to see you, Leighton.
Thanks, guys. Well, hey, honestly, I've been keeping an eye on your podcast and what you're up to. And honestly, it's one of those things I said, where was this years ago when I was in the trenches and trying to figure out how to, get my technicians to care and do a good job and take care of the customer. I mean, the customer is very different. The customer, I think it was Jeff Bezos who said, you do a bad job, a customer used to just tell 5 or 6 people. Now they'll go online and tell 7,000.
Yeah.
And is it
Unless you
my
tie them up and put a gag over their mouth, then you're generally safe, but you can't get away with that.
Exactly. Or you hire one of those, those like, kind of somewhere on the eastern side of the world firms that apparently can like make reviews go away, but it doesn't really work. And, and then Google shuts your company down and, so it's, so there's that. But
or you hire the guy from Jersey, with the crooked nose, and that could help out too.
Is that you, Larry?
No, that's not me at all. My nose is straight so far.
Okay.
Yeah. That's good. But I'm happy to be here, and thanks for having me on, guys.
No, thank you. So Leighton, I know that we've had a conversation, you and I, prior to the podcast. I know you haven't always just done tech work. So maybe you break down and tell us your background, where you grew up, how you grew up, what you did before you were doing Know How, all that good stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up probably like a lot of your listeners. I grew up with my family, both sides had roots in farming, and so I was kind of a small town kid. Grew up working with my hands, and every summer the expectation was you had to get a trades job, a job to learn a trade. And so when I was young, it was either shingling or pulling wire or installing siding or you'd have to go split wood on the farm or something like that. So that was a big part of how I grew up. And then
Leighton, where did you grow up?
So I'm based in Canada, and so the equivalent of like the U.S. Midwest is the Canadian prairies.
Yeah. Okay.
And so I grew up. This is an interesting. We can go down this side road if you want. It makes for a very interesting conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what
our podcast is all about.
Yeah. All right, listener, buckle up. Right. So I learned how to swim in Pablo Escobar's swimming pool, and that's a true fact. Yeah. Yeah. So my parents actually, half my life, I lived internationally, primarily in South America. And so my parents were international workers in Central and South America, 2 farm kids, right, from like the Midwest of North America. And so I was born in Colombia, and kind of lived there during that. If any listeners been listening to like the watching these Narcos shows or stuff like that, that period of time, that kind of like Pablo Escobar period of time was
He
when
was a
we lived
drug
there.
lord, wasn't he? He's a drug lord
Yeah,
in
he's a drug
Colombia or
lord.
something. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
he was
your parents are brave.
my parents are very brave. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, they're very brave, and so they had four little gringos running around, and I was one. And I ended up we moved back to Canada,
Okay,
and
hold on. I'm sorry. I have to interrupt. We glazed over why you learned to swim in Pablo Escobar's swimming pool.
yeah. So Pablo Escobar, depending on, probably which side of the conversation you're on, I lean towards the side where he was a terrible man, right?
Mhm.
And so when he was killed, a lot of his assets were seized by the Colombian government, and part of that was his kind of famous farm, or I think you'd say in Spanish,
Zoo.
uh, zoo. Yeah, he had a zoo there, the hippopotamuses and all those things. And part of that was outside Bogota, which is the capital city of Colombia. Bogota at that time was the most violent city in the world, about 80 murders a weekend. And so it was a spicy place. Even though Colombians don't like spicy food. And
I
so
did not
long
know
story,
that.
yeah. So long story short, um, the government seized a lot of that land, and then kind of in the area, the international organization that we were part of purchased some land, built a school there, and if my recollection is correct, we would when we did like phys ed, we'd often march across the dirt road to his property, and there, use his tennis courts, and use a swimming pool and stuff like that. And so I guess it wasn't his anymore. I guess it was the Colombian government's.
Yeah, that's pretty
But
cool, though.
Yeah, yeah. So into that crucible, you know, I was
You
formed.
know, the title of this podcast is going to be Leighton Healy swam in Pablo Escobar's pool or
Yeah,
something.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly right.
So
Exactly.
you
He
went from
was.
Central America back to Canada. It's quite a
Yeah. So
trek.
when back to Canada, experienced the concept of the sun being up after 6 p.m. Experienced the concept of cold weather and all that different stuff. And so, long story short, my parents, being both farm kids, we really got plugged into what I would think is probably one of the most formative cultural elements of my development, which is kind of like the farm community, like that small town, kind of takes a village type of community. And all of my brothers, we really took well to working with our hands and working with people. And so, if you know how to work with your hands and you're good with people, and you move to a big city, which is what I did after I got out of high school, it was either kind of military or that. Which another interesting story is, you're required as a Colombian citizen. I was required to have military service, so we can talk about how to stick handle your way around mandatory military service. But so, long story short, I said, you know what? I'll go to the proverbial big city, which for us is a city called Calgary, Alberta. Most people have heard of like Banff, Canada. So I'm like a, 40 minutes, you know,
Yep.
as the raven flies to Banff.
Beautiful there.
And damn it, it's
I've been.
awesome.
Yeah.
Yep. So tried to get a construction company going. And here's the story. I struggled to get it to scale. I think a lot of your audience can probably appreciate that. I had a hard time getting my hands off the tool, had a hard time finding and keeping good people. Generally what it was is if there was a task that was hard, difficult, or dangerous, I would do it. And if there was a task that was like, you know, easy, cushy, and I could convince someone to do it, the staff would do it. And so I ended up actually through the recommendation of a friend, getting a franchise, kind of like a trades franchise. And what it did is it gave me gave me systems, gave me
Yep.
structure, and I took off. And so that, pardon me, that network had been around for probably, I don't know, maybe 40 years at that point. And I became, yeah, I built the most profitable, highest staff productivity franchise in the history of that network. And I think really what it was is that I just learned how you bring structure and routines and systems into delivery, and I really took to it. So I ended up spending 7 years after that as a senior leader in that network. We had, between the two brands, we had, 400 or 500 locations across North America, and really observed firsthand like the challenges that like labor intense companies have to drive consistency across their workforces, and just take back owner time. Like, I mean, it was so stark, the difference between what we would call an owner operator versus like a business owner. Like, we'd even do different training for them when we'd have conferences and stuff, because it was just so night and day. And so
You're
yeah.
hitting on every common theme of every podcast
Mhm.
that Larry and I have.
Yeah, exactly.
Hey, yeah, we could talk about a lot of stuff. I've
Yeah.
I've been there.
I was watching I was on a plane the other day, and I was watching Yellowstone, Kevin Costner. I don't know if you've seen that. And in the pilot episode, he's got his oldest son out in the field, and he said to the son, who was like a hard worker, he said, there's a difference between working a ranch and running a ranch.
Yeah, man.
You work the ranch, I run a ranch. And I was just like, I need to like get a clip of that and just play that over and over and over to, for every service business owner out there.
Oh man, I can tell you, like, so a lot of my family are farmers, and I've got one chunk of my cousins, and they run a farm, and they are big businessmen, and you can always tell, when like a farmer or rancher is like a big businessman in how they describe what they do. Soon as they are like a colossal business owner, they're like, yeah, I'm just a dumb farmer. What do I know?
Yeah.
And when they're like an owner operator, they're like, no one works harder than me. It's amazing, but
There's a transition. You get to a point and you're like, yep, I'm good with this. And I'm self-confident. I know exactly what I'm doing.
Well,
Yeah,
the
totally.
thing is that the guy who only knows how to work will
Mhm.
put all of his or her pride in that. Whereas the other person is like, yeah, I'm running this thing and I don't have to work so hard. They don't live and die on how hard I work. It's what the
Yeah.
accomplishment is.
Yeah, and you learn how to chalk your wins up through your people. I mean, I knew what it was like to, my head to hit the pillow when I was trying to do it all on my own, and to be like, good day's work. My grandpa always said you got to work hard. And then, fast forward a couple of years, just experienced staff walking up to me and being like, hey, boss, I just want to let you know I bought my first house. I'm like,
yeah,
wow, like, that's really cool, man.
Huh? Yep.
Or the day, funny story, but the day when a worker walked up to me and said, hey, boss, do you mind signing this? I'm like, what is this? I'm kind of hoping you can co-sign. I'm buying this engagement ring for my girlfriend, and I don't have the credit, but I got the cash. This guy was killing it. Like, I was, I had kind of a piecework system, and he was just like killing it. I was paying him like $8,000 a week, and so I'm like, yeah, sure, man. So, but it's stuff like that where I started shifting. I was pretty young. I was like 19.
Must
and
have
I was
been
like,
quite a ring.
yeah, exactly.
Did you say
Well,
you were 19?
yeah, so I got at it pretty young, man. So
Wow.
Yeah, big time.
yeah.
Very young.
So on the ring, you should have seen his credit. It was bad, right? So I'm saying, I don't think he could have got a cell phone prepaid card.
Yeah, but it was rewarding for you, right?
Well,
That's rewarding.
just it. That's just it. Yeah, and I think that was what really clicked is, we're driven by things. We're motivated by things. Like right now, I'm in a part of Canada where it's a very oil and gas driven industry. It's been a fountain of success, but it's not what it was before, and so they're trying to spur on more entrepreneurs. And so much of what my advice tends to be, you don't need to create every opportunity for an entrepreneur. You just need to tell them there's gold in that mountain. And what the gold is changes over time. And I think when you first get started, you're just so sick of being bossed around. You say, I could do this. And then you get out there and you realize there's actually some business skills. And then when you actually become a business owner and you start experiencing, the life you're able to create for your staff and the opportunities you're able to create and the fulfilling work experience. I mean, I'm preaching to the choir here, but I got pretty hooked on that. And so I ended up having the opportunity to help hundreds of me's, kind of make the jump from being a working in it to working on it type of business owner.
Yeah.
And got pretty plugged into things like the Franchise Association internationally, and really what I observed is we were not the only organization that struggled to achieve customer brand delivery and worker consistency and all that yada yada. And as I like to say, keep the proverbial fries tasting the same everywhere in the empire.
Yeah.
And so, long story short, partnered with some people that are much smarter than me to build a machine learning enabled workforce digital platform, right? Which we call know-how.
No, that's awesome. That's a great story, man.
Yeah, that's cool.
Really good story. Yeah, I love when you hear, the person who started struggling, swinging a hammer, and then the progression and the changes that happen over time.
Yeah.
I love those stories, Leighton. That's congratulations to you. That's awesome.
Hey, thanks, man. And you know what? It's there's been a lot of people over the years that have played a pretty instrumental role. So happy to stand on their input. So
Yeah. Well, I wanna segue a little bit because we were kind of talking about swinging a hammer, and the thing is that us as owners can't be successful without good people swinging hammers and doing all those things. And as you know, Larry and I mean, our whole mission statement of our company is to make the lives better for technicians.
Totally.
I mean, and by virtue of that, it'll be better for the client and then better for the business as well. But it starts and ends with the technicians. And Larry and I learned the hard way ourselves that the majority of our problems came from the field, because that's where the majority of your employees are. That's where the interface is. So, I want to talk, I would like to have a conversation about frontline service technicians. And I think I wanted to start with, what do you think for not only the technicians, but the owners of companies as well? What are the biggest opportunities right now for frontline service techs?
I'm going to come at that a slightly different way, but I think it'll ground this well. Is, if I was listening to this podcast, I'd say, hey, open the calculator app on your mobile device and let's just do some quick math. So we've done the research, other organizations have done the research, and what everyone has shown is that the average technician, the average frontline worker, will spend about 35% of their week just dealing with the knot that is, what am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to do it? Oh, I did it wrong. I'll go fix it. Where do you want me to be? And so let's just pick a number, $15 an hour. Okay. So you got 10 workers, you're paying them $15 an hour, right? And just do the quick math. We're paying them $40, 40 hours. I mean, you scale it up, and then you got some managers in there. The average manager, what we've found is 40% of a manager or owner's day is simply spent re-explaining, retraining, fixing, or convinced that they're the only person who can do it, because I might as well just do it myself, right? And so you do the math, and what we found is that the average company that's got, let's call it 10 guys in the field, 5 people in the office, and then and then yourself, it's about a $200,000 a year leaky bucket. And so
does that include their labor burden? Because that $15 an hour guy's like 21, 22, really.
Yeah. Totally. And I'm keeping it conservative, but you throw the number in, whatever it is.
Well, my point was, it's probably bigger than that.
Way
even
bigger.
Yeah.
Oh, it's way bigger. It's way bigger. Like I was talking to a company this morning. We just did the math. It was $1.6 million a year. And I said, so here's how I come at this question is, what do you think are the biggest opportunities? We wouldn't think twice about taking our management team away for a strategy meeting and coming up with a clear path and setting those milestones and numbers. But if I was to tell you that, like, there's something else you could do that could impact like $1 million of labor that's just like draining out your company, and the answer isn't a strategic retreat. Now it might populate the agenda of that strategic retreat, right? But let's so on that foundation, because you always want to quantify, like, what is how much pain are we talking about solving right here? So the biggest opportunities in regard to frontline technicians, again, I'm just going to be very direct about this. From what we observe, owners are getting increasingly more trigger shy to be candid and direct with feedback and coaching and direction. because they're worried that they're just going to lose the guy. And so anytime we're talking about, let's implement some systems, let's implement some process, let's implement some structure, let's make it easier than Instagram to follow the way you want things done. Oftentimes they'll say, I just don't think my guys will do that. And
Leighton, I'm coaching these owners on a daily basis. I'm hearing what you said every single day.
Yeah, man.
Every single day, every conversation, it's this guy's driving me crazy, but I can't lose him. I don't, because I'm like, hey, you need to have a review for this person, so that you can fix ill behavior. I can't do that, Leighton. I'm afraid I'll lose him. And even though he's driving me crazy, I still have it.
So the confidence level is that much lower that they can't communicate with these guys. And then, it all goes downhill. Well,
so Leighton, what's the fix?
Yeah.
Well, in psychology, they'll call it learned helplessness, right?
I think that's what Eric's got sometimes when he's dealing with me.
Yeah, exactly. Right. It's just, I won't get into the nuts and bolts of it, but I mean, think of it this way. You're going to meet with a crew that totally screwed something up because they didn't do things the way you want things done. And you're like, well, I can't be super hardline about it because heck, he's been hanging drywall longer than I have. And, blah, 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 blah. And I got him referred from my friend and all this. And then you go to McDonald's to get a coffee. If they miss one thing on that McMuffin, right, you're going to flip your lid. You know what I'm saying? It's such a double standard.
They're not going
right?
fast enough in line. Somebody's going to yell at
fast
him.
Enough,
That's
and like to say, like,
no,
there's a, oh yeah, okay. But you think about it. I mean, who pays less than like a food franchise? You know what I mean? And yet they're like super systems driven. I mean, Michael Gerber was like, you basically need to like just McDonald's your company, right? And so at the end of the day, this is what we've learned is that you need to go from like your business right now is the Wild West. And so it's like, it's all about a strong man, old man strength, like that's the Wild West. And so you say, so if we want to bring in law and order, do you have to have like you're going to get, we're going to string you up if you don't, you have to paint a vision that your staff can get excited about, that they want to be part of. And that's why when you're becoming a systems driven company, it's so common that you'll hear people use terminology from sports like a playbook, right? And say, look, man, think about it. Like how successful would be, pick your workers' favorite sports team. Say, like, how successful would that sports team be if they just winged it on every game? Or, every time they came into the huddle, they just had to come up with a play on the fly. You know what I mean? You say, no, like they have roles, man. They have plays, like they have, and because anytime you've played a game where there's no rules, there's no structure, people aren't doing their part, it's not fun. You know what I mean?
It just breaks down into a total shit show. I mean, anybody that's played pickup basketball knows what that feels like.
Yeah.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, coming up with rules on the fly because an elbow flies and everyone's like, okay, hold on a second. Okay, no elbows, and you're coming up with these rules on the fly.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, if the goal is maximum amount of time spent having fun, right?
Yeah.
It's like, can we agree the goal is maximum amount of time having fun or whatever, meaningful employment or making money or going home and saying I had a great, whatever the goal is, you say, what is, there's some trade-offs. And that's what I always tell people. And I say, look, so much of life, so much of business is about trade-offs. And so you're just experiencing trade-offs. It's like if you're having, workers that aren't getting online, it's a trade-off. You said that the pain of dealing with their griping about stuff is actually less than the pain of me having to be a leader and hold the line. I often mentor business owners, and I'll tell them, say, look, so just remember, if you're going to set this expectation, you better be prepared to hold this expectation, because an expectation set that's not held is just a hypocrite made. And that's always the challenge. So the first thing I would say is leaders need to be courageous, and they need to step into a place where they say, look, I need to get my team excited about being part of a team that runs out of the same playbook, where the goal is success and fun, and less stress, than it is about me just having these one-to-one negotiations on like these little contracts with each person being like what you can fly, and well, that's because it's Marty, and come on, man, Marty. Like, no, you get past all that, right?
Yeah.
The second thing is, there's no way around it, is that anytime you want to get anything done, get in shape, right? Build a house, right? Learn something, everyone's going to tell you the same thing. You need structure, you need routines, you need repeatability. And that's one of the things, there's lots of things I like about, the morning tech meeting and what you guys are doing is because it builds structure, it builds routine.
Yeah, it's a rhythm to the day. Once you get that rhythm to the day going, people are more comfortable with themselves in any business, in any situation.
Totally. I'll give you, I think this is a really good story that you guys, that will resonate with you. So before I got into trying to, build a construction company, a way that I would say hardworking people in Canada, generally guys, try to make money is you either go work on the rigs, on the oil rigs, or you go and you plant trees in northern Canada, right? So you kind of go into the middle of the Canadian bush with like, bears and wolverines, and you put about 2,000 or 3,000 plugs in the ground on the side of a mountain. And so I did that. And you know what? The best crew, like we're talking like the best crew, everyone wanted to work for him, by a guy named Jobin. You'd start at some like horrible hour. You're working in those terrible conditions, and you drive in these huge 350 trucks, and you'd always know when his crews were, because as soon as they hopped out of the truck, they would blare that song Rasputin, I think by ABBA, was it? Is that who it is? And it was like the whole crew, didn't matter, didn't matter how you, like, everyone had to dance, right?
Everybody's dancing to ABBA like it's a play.
Larry, that is right up your alley.
Yeah.
Right? Like everyone had to dance, and then everyone had to share something they were looking forward to that day. It was a crap job, right? Everyone had to say something they're looking forward to that day and something they want to get better at. And you know what? I'll tell you, they came back to camp, because we were in bush camps, like tarp showers, and and their crew was always in a better mood. On average, they always hit better numbers. And you know what? They were like, they just didn't lose anybody. Where the rest of the crews, super turnover issues.
Yeah, well, they were building culture and team.
Hey, exactly.
That's really what it boils down to,
Yeah.
Yeah. And back to the real quick, talking about, the morning meeting, whether it's our videos or just doing one, if you follow, Larry and I are big proponents of DISC personality profile training. And we use DISC for everything in our company, and everybody knew their DISC profile. And, we've spoken DISC at our shop. And if you know DISC, most technicians tend to be SC or CS, and both of those like stability and structure. So the more we could meet at the same time in the same way, the happier they were and the more productive they would be.
And to build on that, so I think that's great. And there's so many good personality programs. DISC, I think, is definitely one of the best. It's very practical. I think it's very easy for.
It's easy for everybody to understand.
Yeah,
it's easy to understand. It's easy
thorough
for them.
enough that it makes a difference as well.
Yeah,
totally. But what I've seen, what's more than that is there's a big difference between turnover and regrettable turnover, right? And the reality is that, in the same thing, it's like when you have a sense of who's the right person. I mean, we haven't even talked about, one of the biggest opportunities around frontline workers is to learn how to properly interview people, right?
Yeah.
How to properly have a selection process when you're so busy. You're like, just, why don't you show up tomorrow and we'll see how you do, right? Like, that's not a selection process, right? But at the end of the day, a good program with structure that is tailored towards the profile of the person that does best in that role, it repels the wrong people. Meaning, eventually people are like, that's how you do things? I'm not into that. And eventually, over time, they self-select out. And you know what? That's not regrettable turnover. That is a role and a structure and a program that self-polices, in a sense. And that's healthy.
That's an interesting point, because Larry and I in the early days would basically like, oh, we're busy, can you fog a mirror? You're hired, right? And then what happens? massive problems, the whole thing. So even for, technician roles, as we got better, they had to have 3 interviews to get a job.
And we'd have our guys interview them too.
Yes,
It wasn't
so
just
the
us.
first interview would be the girls in the office, because if they couldn't pass those women, they weren't going to pass our clients, because the ladies in the office were very similar to our clients, right? We're going into homes. And then the next one, we would have our guys interview them, because they're the ones going to be working with them, not us. And then if they made it through those 2, then we would interview them. And you know what? It's just what you said. The bad ones would self-select out. They'd be like, I'm not interviewing 3 times for this crummy job. It's like, great. We didn't want you anyway.
Yep. Save us all a lot of time.
Yeah. And it's not easy to do that. I mean, that's resources, but you're gonna spend that time, energy, and money one way or the other, either on the front end or the back end.
Right.
I'd rather do it on the front.
And the way to do it on the front, I mean, I think you guys would agree with this. The way that you do it on the front is that you just, in the same way that, every day you grab a cup of coffee, every week, you got to pay your bills. You just put a standing commitment that every Tuesday from 3 to 5, I'm like recruiting, and it's just one of those things where people are way too reactive. What I've learned is they can be too reactive when it is hiring roles. And then you see these trucks that are driving around with your competitor that, you wish you were as big as them, and they say, we're hiring, call this number. They're probably not hiring, but they know that, there is a finite amount of great people out there. And you know what? You never know when it's opportune for them to apply. Just because you need someone doesn't mean a good person's available. And so always in a role that has such high turnover, like service, I just think it's just part of, you should just expect, my goal is to do this many sales meetings a week, to hit these type of numbers. And every single week I'm doing 4 interviews a week or whatever, you know what I'm saying? And you find a total all-star, you'll make space for them. Heck, you'll go book another job because you're so excited for that technician. Yeah. Right. But I find when you get your back against the wall, that's where you make sloppy hires.
Yeah.
Oh, and then the fallout from that takes so much time and energy to undo. And then,
totally,
everybody now in the whole organization is upset because when you make that wrong hire, and it's creates drama, and people want stable.
Yeah, the good staff that you have, they get alienated and they start looking around too, and you don't want that to happen as well. So you got to cater to them, your best people, the most, and not by putting them with crappy team members.
Leighton, you may know this from your data collection. Do you know how long the average mitigation technician stays at a job? What the turnover time is? Roughly?
Yeah, so roughly the average tenure of I guess you just say like a worker in North America in like a service role.
Okay.
Yeah. So on average, again, it's about 9 months. In a technician role, what we see is, and again, like if you factor out, you almost have to focus on regrettable turnover, because in some companies the turnover is so high. Like in many industries, like the food industry, some food industries will replace their entire staff, in terms of just headcount 7 times over on a year. So there's about a 700% turnover rate in some industries, right?
That hurts so much just even talking about.
Oh yeah, totally. It sucks. It sucks for everybody, right?
Yeah.
And I do mean that for everybody. Like the payroll administrator who's like, okay, this is like our 9th mark. Which mark are we talking about? You know what I'm saying? It's just it sucks for everybody, right? And so at the end of the day, I would say a safe estimate would be it's probably under 8 months, for the average technician. And there's always outliers, but at the end of the day,
wow,
I'll tell you, like I don't want to get ahead of myself here, but we focus on different industries. Our focus is in labor-intensive workforces, and so one of the things that we're focused on right now is doing the largest workforce survey in property restoration in the workforce. It's a large industry, and why property restoration and not roofing or HVAC or plumbing or whatnot? Well, property restoration is an interesting industry in that it's so multifaceted, that what's working for property restoration, the wake of it, lends itself well to other industries. So, you think of a house that I don't know, burns down. I mean, you kind of coming in, you're doing everything. You're doing hot, crazy mitigation, but then you're doing demo, then you're doing, the whole house has to be rebuilt, right? And so it's not just kind of a single service. So they're actually a good indicator, because they draw on so many different services and they use so many different trades to be able to do things. So it's an interesting industry. And and so what
The
I can
whole
tell you.
job could take longer than the 9 months where you have the guy that's in your team.
Oh,
The job's going to be longer than
totally.
9 months. I guess that number is kind of blowing me away, because I'm thinking if you have a company that does a really good job of engaging with your guys, there's opportunity to keep them longer than about 9 months. And if our listeners are thinking, oh my God, I'm going to lose my guy in 9 months, you stay focused on him.
That's very leadership dependent, I think, in some ways.
Okay. I'm sorry, Leighton. Keep going. I apologize.
But to what you're saying, Larry, I think you nailed it, is that the, data is always dragged down, and it really doesn't allow, I would say, the stars to sometimes really shine brightly, star companies.
Yeah.
And so if you're listening to this podcast, if you're like a consistent listener to this, you're an intentional business owner, you're thinking about these things, and you know what? You're frankly, you're probably an outlier. I mean, that 6 to 8 months is really being dragged down by just, I mean, hey, we survey, we do a lot of research, and one of the things that drives technicians crazy, it sounds like I'm talking about the dark ages here, is when project managers refer to them by what they're wearing. Hey, you boots. Hey, you red jacket. And you say, hey, like, why don't you learn their name? And the response is because I know in that moment that they think it's so normalized that I'm most likely going to quit, that they won't even invest in learning my name. You know what I'm saying?
Dead man walking.
Yeah. That's poor leadership skills from there.
Oh, I remember as a kid, that was always the way for me.
Yeah. So I'll tell you, like, and we can get into this stuff, but so we're doing this massive research project because right now the biggest threat and the biggest opportunity in labor workforces is workforce challenges. How will we attract, retain, promote, and frankly, help them to see a career? And we can talk about that, but we're very interested in that because one, we're a workforce software, so that's one, and so we really always want to be on the cutting edge of that. But the other side of it is that there has been work that's gone into trying to understand these industries, but it's almost always been the owner responding to a survey. No one's really stretched the microphone down a few rungs to the guy on the front lines or the girl on the phones and saying, hey, what's it like to work where you work? Do you see yourself there 6 months from now? What's it like to for someone who English isn't their first language to work at your company? What are some obstacles that women have to overcome to really make it in your I mean, there's all this stuff. You get 500 to 1,000 people to respond to that, you learn some things, right? Yeah. And I'll tell you, here's some things we're learning. Let's peek behind the curtain, right?
Yeah, please.
One is just the paradox that we see exist in so many companies where, you kind of look at the data set and you say, okay, well, it's all anonymous. It's an anonymous survey, right? But, but from a data standpoint, you can make correlations. And so you look at these individuals clearly identified themselves on the management side, and these individuals identified themselves on the worker side. What are some of the obstacles to succeeding in this company? Management, nothing. Maybe you're lazy. If you're not respectful on the worker, it's a toxic place to work. And it's like we're just not on the same page. And so the question is always, how do we get on the same page, and who has to take the biggest, widest step? And we can talk about that. And what I would say, hands down, is that when you're like, well, no one trained me when I got in the trade, or no one this or no one this and all that, and then this technician's like, hey, sorry, I don't know what an angle grinder is. Grew up with a single mom. Like, what the heck do I know what an angle? You know what I'm saying? It's like, who has to come to the middle?
The owner and the managers are the ones who have to take the initiative.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. We had a really interesting conversation with a woman. We had a webinar, and she designs customer experience for like cutting edge airlines, right? So why is that relevant? Is because she's taking old antiquated industries that are trying to evolve to consumer preferences, and saying what are the changes that you need to make to still be relevant 5 years from now, right? And I asked her that question. I said, you've got someone who's 60 years old. He's been in the trade forever. His dad was in the trade, and then you got this young girl who's 20 years old and really wants to get in, but she prefers to learn this way. She doesn't learn this way. She doesn't have experience with this, and she's not comfortable with this. Who's got to change? She didn't even miss a beat. She said exactly what you said, Eric. She's like, that owner should either change or retire.
Yep.
Right.
Larry and I had to, Leighton, real quick, we lived this because Larry and I, our age is, we're Generation X, but we're like right on the cusp of baby boomer, right? So our parents raised us a lot differently than the people who worked for us.
Right.
So, we had been of the just shut up and figure it out generation, and when we started our service business, we were kind of running it that way, like, hey, let's go haze the new guy and see if he survives kind of deal. I was infamous for that. And, as we lost good people, as we had too much turnover, as we had lots of drama, Larry and I had to really look in the mirror and say, millennials do not respond to this. Like it's not them, it's us. Like we don't have people our age who want to crawl under houses and sewage. Right? So we need to train younger people to do this and to actually work in a place where they understand why we do it and take pride in it. And it not only changed our company, but I think, Larry, you could correct me if I'm wrong, it changed Larry and I, our lives.
Yeah. How we interacted with people in general and how we viewed things and judged things and conducted ourselves.
Yeah. It was life changing, but it was also life affirming for us because we realized that we needed to really bring these people into our lives to get fully what we wanted in return. And it was more rewarding than money. You can always make money somehow.
Yeah. And I think to bring it home further, I think you guys will both agree with this, is that probably the same thing when you're trying to ask, one of your staff, or you're asking, but one of the companies you guys are engaging with to try to create some structure to empower that frontline worker. We take it from a very similar approach where we'll talk about, hey, the value of being systematic, the value of bringing structure. And it's very common that we'll have prospective clients will say, you know what, you're selling to the wrong person. You should be talking to my spouse, because if it was up to them, this is an easy decision, right? They're sick of my dinners being interrupted because I'm like, well, that new guy didn't work out, and so I got to go do it, right? Or that family vacation getting postponed because ultimately I made the decision to be an indispensable part of my company, right? Because I've never really been hardliner about replicating myself, right? And at the end of the day, like, a lot of these industries, this kind of like strongman, do it myself, never had any structure, I think it grinds on their families.
Well, when you go to the good companies, they don't look like that. You can always tell when you walk into a good, doesn't matter if it's plumbing, heating, air, restoration. When you walk into a company that has, done well, started in somebody's garage, but then scaled to 30, 40, 50 people, it is nothing like you just said. No. It's people with roles. It's structure. The place is neat and tidy. It's what a guy, Steve Toburin, in our industry calls building a beautiful business, that everything about it is beautiful. And you have to get your head around that, opposed to how much do I want to suffer in my life? Because those owners are not suffering. Doesn't mean their life's easy, but they have figured out a way to build a business that there's something in it for everybody, not just them.
Yeah. And they're looking at the information and they're thinking about what they can do to change so that it's not stuck in their head, so that their spouses aren't upset with them because they couldn't stay for dinner or they canceled vacations like you were talking about. They're making the next steps to move along so that they don't have to worry about it. What are you laughing at, Eric?
Well, we've done all that.
Yeah.
How many dinners, Larry, have you had interrupted in your life?
Most of them for many years.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it takes a lot of thoughtfulness to get past that.
Reflection, thinking, coaching. Totally. Coaching is the thing that dramatically helped us. But, you know, just seeing the data that you see has got to be so helpful.
It is. And so we are going to, go to restorationsurvey.net, take 10 minutes, encourage your staff to do it, right? I don't want you to, if your listeners, the owner, don't think you can dodge it and be like, oh, I'm going to pretend I'm a technician, say it's an amazing place to work. It doesn't work that way, right? At the end of the day, what we want is we say, hey, tell your guys, hey guys, take 10 minutes on your phones, fill this thing out, because if you do, we call you a workforce champion and we'll give you the data, right? You know what I mean? Still anonymous, right? You get anonymized data, but you can look at it and you can learn from it. And so it won't surprise you. We're taking all this complexity and making it simple, in that we're releasing an ebook, and we'll do a bunch of webinars, and hey, maybe we'll come back and I'll tell you all the data, right?
Yeah, no, we want that.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
Yeah.
That'd be very valuable.
And the beauty of it is that we're super focused on tangible, tactical. It's if I was a listener on this podcast, I would say okay, guys, I'm in, I'm converted, I'm sold. So now there's the how, right? And one of the things that I would say is that if you are experiencing a business that's going through a lot of turnover, you're a bit of a conveyor, you're a bit of a turnstile, you can look at that as what it is. It's terrible. It's not a fun place to work. It's not a fun place to be the business owner. But think of it as this: it is a great place to implement new things. Because one of the best ways to implement new systems, new structure, new anything, is when it's from day one. This is what I expect from you as a worker, right? And so if you have a lot of day ones, in your business, because for whatever reason, you know what, that's a good opportunity to lay a foundation. And so, so what does that look like very practically? Is that ultimately there is a way that things should be done in your business, in every department, right? And what, there's a way that a sale should be done. There's a way that an estimate should be done. There's a way. And you'll often say, well, I just kind of made this up. I don't even know if this is the best way to do an estimate. It's what, that doesn't matter. That's the way. Yeah. And the way evolves over time. You listen to a podcast, you get a tip, you tweak the way you do it, right? But at the end of the day, you do need to bring gravity to each department. And, at the end of the day, there's a saying that, I've always kind of held on to, which is, gradual improvement is better than delayed perfection, right? And so they say, I'm going to improve gradually rather than just for this, this point of perfection that, I'm trying to chase, it's never going to come. And so you just lock down some systems and processes. And then from there, you set that as the expectation. Hey guys, and this is one of the most valuable things that, I've given to business owners over the years, just like a nice little packaging. And it's just this phrase, going forward, right? And it sounds like this. Hey guys, I know yesterday, this is how we did it, but going forward, we're going to do it like this. And they say, well, blah, blah, blah. I understand. Yesterday, that's how we did it. But going forward, this is how we're going to do it. And they're like, well, I'm not going to do it that way. Well, you know what, man? Hey, I mean, you've been here a long time. You know that people don't stick around very long. So maybe this isn't right fit for you. But going forward, we're going to work as a team to try to build this playbook. And we're going to really begin to build something that we're proud of. And that's where you start. And then from there, you start to get buy-in. You start to find champions on your team. And you know what? At the end of the day, maybe they're not going to get it exactly the way you wanted, but a standardized version that's 70% of the way you would do it is actually not bad. You know what I'm saying?
Well, what we did when we built out all our systems was we would say, look, guys, we're going to build a system for doing this. It may not be perfect. We need your feedback. So we're going to implement this. And in 30 days or 2 weeks or whatever, we want you to come to the table and say, these parts are great. These 3 things need some work. And then we would tweak. And we found that by making them part of the solution, they would buy in more.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, people want to feel like Larry, you had said earlier, talking about millennials, and now we've got to start thinking about Gen Zs, and so millennials are, by most estimates, within the next 4 to 5 years, millennials will make up 50% of the workforce, right? And so now we're starting to think about Gen Zs, this generation coming up, and there's different, they're motivated by different things. And this is what's really interesting, is that most studies of demographics and those types of, age groups, you'd think that when a young generation comes into a workforce, they rapidly adopt the patterns of, say, the most older and most senior work. It makes sense. We have this kind of tribal mentality that you follow the old guard. It's actually the reverse. What's reverse is that, and we see it mostly in technology trends, is that the youngest workers bring in, the most the trending technology, the cool things, the slang, the style, whatever. And then it's often the older guard that don't want to get left behind that begin adopting. So it's a backward swell. And so that doesn't mean that, when you hire a Gen Z, you say, so how should we run our business today? Right? That's not what we're saying. That's not what we're saying, right?
Do you think that's true in the trade? I'm sorry to interrupt, Leighton. Do you think that's also true in the trades? Because I've not seen that yet. I'm not saying it couldn't happen. And Larry and I had a little bit of that going, especially with technology, like, why are we doing it this way? But
right.
They weren't we've been out for a few years, but they weren't driving it yet. Do you think that will change to be more like the tech companies?
Well, what we know is this. Is that ultimately everyone in the next 5 to 10 years, the big competitive advantage is, are you able to attract and retain, young workers, right? It's going to be a big component of it, right? And so what we know is, and so one of the things that, I think that, we had talked about some of the things we should talk about today. And one was, what's a big piece of business advice? And I would say, pay attention to the tidal wave of trends that are emerging in the labor worker, and one of the emerging trends is technology preferences, not a preference for technology preferences. And so one of the things I often tell people is, I say, hey, keep in mind, Google, Amazon, Facebook, YouTube, Pinterest, you just list them all out. They pay thousands of engineers, $250,000 a year, to tell your worker how knowledge and guidance and advice should serve them. And then, so that's you just have to pay attention to it, right? Because they come to your business primed, for how they should receive knowledge, how they should receive instruction, so that's one thing. The other thing is that they do have learning preferences. Interestingly enough, millennials are one of the most learning-oriented staff segments of the market, meaning that if you're trying to find a way, I'm not saying you should pay your staff less, but if you're trying to find a way to compete with the guy across the street who's offering another $1 an hour, offer training. Because to a millennial worker, training and development in the sense of progression, at the end of the day, knowing that I've got one more basement to muck out or one more roof to tear down is not very motivating. But knowing that in week 3 on this job, I learned how to manage the truck. And in week 6, I learned how to have customer conversations. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because this is a workforce that they value learning and development progression, and it just so happens that they do like tools that complement their learning, that are that feel like TikTok, right? Right.
Yeah, it's true. Right.
That's an addicting app.
All right. I want to know. Where does it, before we move on, we do rapid fire questions before we finish up. So, yeah. Leighton, what's your favorite business book?
Oof, I'm gonna have to go author because
okay,
I'm a book guy. So yeah, I'd say if on the topic of leadership, I think a very approachable author is a guy named Max Dupree. He's written a lot of good books. Leadership is an Art, Leadership Jazz. So Max Dupree is a great author. Quick read, you can throw it in on your backpack and you're taking a week off, and it's an easy read. if your listeners are a lot like our clients, they're on the go, and so audiobooks are really helpful. And so I find business books that are wrapped in like business fables are really helpful when you're on the go. Few people are better than Patrick Lencioni, right? Patrick Lencioni,
Mhm.
Five Temptations of a CEO, what's it called? Meetings Suck, Get Naked. Like, he's got a whole list of books where the principles are wrapped in a story. It's very easy to listen to as you're like zipping around doing stuff. So Patrick Lencioni. And if you want, if you just want like that, like timeless business stuff, I'm a Peter Drucker guy, the old German business management guru. It's amazing. You write something 50 years ago and you open it today and you're like, okay, like if some people's listening to this and they're like, where do I go to like learn how like adults run companies? You know, you know, you pick up Peter Drucker. You pick up his book like The Practice of Management, and I'm not saying you build the next General Electric, but what I'm saying is that yeah, there's some principles that are just true to business, and it's less about it's so many times when we're trying to make changes in our business, it's like, am I willing to do it? Sometimes a Peter Drucker comes into your business and says, this is the right way to run a business. And so it's less about should you do it? It's more, so currently you're doing it wrong. So, do you want to do it right? And so, anyways, some of those like stalwart compasses, I like to read like a Peter Drucker.
Okay. Podcasts. They don't have to
I'm
be
a,
business related either.
well, that's good. I'm a history buff myself, and a really good podcast is a guy named Dan Carlin. He has a podcast called Hardcore History. Even though I'm a Canuck,
Oh,
I
he's
like, I
good.
like, I like.
Yeah,
Mhm.
listen to Dan Carlisle. He's very good.
Yeah, yeah, I like him. A lot of really great. I like American history. The U.S. has a really amazing. Yeah, it's an amazing experiment in world history, and so there's some podcasts on American history that I think are really cool. But I like Dan Carlin's Hardcore History. It's really entertaining.
Do you have a business podcast that you like?
There's this one called Blue Collar Nation. I don't know if you heard of it,
Well,
but it's
that's a given. I mean, we knew that already.
yeah,
No, other
yeah.
than this wonderful podcast that
Yeah,
Larry and I
exactly. Yeah.
came duct tape together every week.
You know what, man? I don't have a business podcast that I'm really glued to right now.
Yeah.
Um, I have a 16-month-old son, and he's demanding.
Yeah.
Yeah. So not at this time, but hey, I'm open to if your audience or you guys have any good recommendations, I'm always
I
looking.
have one that I think that you would particularly like, and I've
All right.
said this a couple times. It's called Masters of Scale. And
Oh yeah,
it's by
Reid
Reid
Hoffman.
Hoffman. Yeah, that's a really interesting podcast.
Yeah, man, I've crushed some Masters of Scale. Yeah, and he wrote a book with a guy named Chris Ye called Blitz Scaling, and wouldn't recommend it to your audiences. It's like a lot of it. It's like tolerate bad management as you're trying to build some
Yeah,
massive thing. But Masters of Scale, yeah, good
yeah,
recommendation.
yeah. I like that one.
Mhm.
Cool. And then we already did the number one. You want to summarize your number one piece of business advice? You kind of touched on it earlier, but you want to.
I would summarize what I said earlier, Eric, by simply saying, rather than looking at some of the quirky things that the incoming workforce does as something that makes them different, ask yourself, how could this be a competitive advantage if I find a way to accommodate it? Because the way that a worker what they prefer to talk about, what they prefer to, I don't know, do on an evening, what they prefer to see on their phone, at the end of the day, preferences are a lot stronger than what you're hung up on or what your stubborn dead set way of doing something is. And so I'm not saying you compromise on everything, but I would just say um, very soon companies are going to be distinguished by those who young people want to work for versus those that because never before has it been easier for young people to spread the news that there's a place you should not work, right?
Yeah.
But never before has it been faster that young people. So, for example, one of the questions we asked in this massive survey is, How did you, it's not how did you get this job? It's what were you doing for work before this job? It's actually a very specific question, right? And a lot of people would say, you were working at, say, another roofing company or another construction company. It's not actually, it's interesting. It's, you got to read the book to find out, right? But the other thing is, you got to find, so I would just say the things that kind of tick you off about the incoming workforce, maybe look at them differently and just say, if one of my competitors just kind of flipped this on its side and said, you know what, maybe if we kind of just leveraged some of those differences, your competitor might really gain a competitive advantage over you. So you might as well be that person. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, that makes total sense.
No, it makes a lot of sense.
Larry and I talk about that all the time. It's like you can sit around and complain about, whatever thing of a next generation you don't like, but they're all going to work for somebody in your town, and it won't be you. And then you're going to be sitting there and you can't grow because you don't have any people to work for you.
Right.
That makes no sense.
And it's easier just to own it and figure it out than just complain about it, because it's a better way of being.
Larry and I viewed our restoration company as a life academy that happened to do restoration for a living. Yeah. So we realized to attract good people that I used to tell the guys that. I said, look, this is a life academy. Like, you will leave. Like, you're not going to be here forever. You will leave. Yeah. And I understand that you're probably going to leave in 2 years or 3 years.
Hope in the 9 months.
Well, no, that was going to be my point. We had very few people that ever stayed only 9 months.
Yeah.
And I'd say, no matter what, I'm going to pour everything into you until you leave. So you will leave here much more skilled than when you came. And that's attractive to people. Totally. And, opposed to having somebody just mailing in every day, because you go, well, I'm not going to train him. He's going to leave me anyway. Okay. And, we had peers that would say, like, I don't understand why they would use the word waste all this time and energy training these people. Their parents should have done it, or the school should have done it. It's like, well, they didn't. So get over it. Get over yourself and go train them, know?
Yeah. And you know what, all I would say to that person is, I'd say, you know what, if I was your competitor, you'd be pretty easy to topple. Yeah. Because it sounds like all I have to do is just like change my mindset. I don't have to come up with a flashy flyer. I don't have to have better gear than you. I can have beat up trucks. It sounds like all I need to do is just think a different way tomorrow, and I could actually out compete you. You know what I'm saying?
I think you're right.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of that going on right now, because the labor market's so tight. Is the ones who make that mental adjustment, they're going to win.
And if you just plan that your people are going to keep leaving. But I'll tell you, when they play the field and they realize what they had, have an open door policy. You know what I mean? Don't scorch earth when your guys leave. I'm a big believer, and I would always tell my crews this back in the day. I'd say, hey, I've worked hard, and I think that you guys are the best people I could find. I believe that you never really employ people. You just kind of rent them for a while. You just kind of delay them for their next opportunity, right? Sometimes when it comes to roles that tend to have high turnover, if someone's been with you for a few years, sometimes you got to ask yourself, like, is that a good thing? You know what I'm saying? Like, if you're not providing upward trajectory in your business and they're just in that role, I'm gonna say it's like a rhetorical question, just to think about, right? And so I really think that what you said just a moment ago is that we were a learning organization or a learning academy that just so happens to be doing this. You know what? I think that's really interesting, and I think few things are more connected to how millennials want to work. Is they want to come to learning organizations and then say, and you see this fence that's got to get ripped down. This is today's lesson. You know what I'm saying? And that works with them, right?
Yeah, they want purpose. I mean, Larry and I, our entire business, other than the two of us, was millennials at the time.
Yeah.
And everybody would be like, "Oh, millennials," and Larry and I'd be looking at each other like, they're the best. They work hard. It's just you've got to play the game on their terms to a certain degree.
Think of it as a gas tank, right? Like, each worker runs on something, and different generations, different things burn, and we all know that certain fuels burn hotter than others. But some fuels are just harder to contain and create than others. So one worker that might be, say, a baby boomer, they run on security and predictability. A Gen Xer, they might run on just practical, like, how much are you paying me? A millennial tends to run on purpose. And purpose is hard to bottle, but man, it burns hot. Right?
Yeah. Cool. Well, Leighton, can you go over again for everybody, how to find you, and then especially how to get the restoration survey? Because everybody listening, if you're in the restoration industry, please have everybody do this, because the more data we have, the better we can all be.
Totally. Ask number one, restorationsurvey.net. Put it into your phone, text it to your crews, and just say, hey, take 10 minutes and do this. It's totally anonymous. We're drawing a lot of sweet prizes. They can win a bunch of like reciprocating saws and stuff like that. And say, hey, it's a step for us to contribute back to the industry to find out, how we can kind of, essentially just create a better worker experience. It's not going to expose your business. So restorationsurvey.net. How to get connected with know-how. If you are a labor company, like a labor intensive company, and you're experiencing any of the following challenges, okay, you should go to tryknowhow.com, click a button, and we should just talk for 10 minutes. If you're trying to eliminate workforce inconsistencies, if you're trying to free up management time, if you're trying to, as an owner, finally shift from working in the business to on the business, if you're trying to figure out how to streamline operations, or you're just trying to reduce regrettable turnover, then you should go to tryknowhow.com, click call me, and we should talk for 10 minutes.
Perfect.
Great.
Well, thank you for taking the time today. We really appreciate that. And it
Yeah,
was a good
this is great stuff.
conversation. And I know Larry, I speak for Larry, we would like to have you on so that we can dig down deep on what the findings are, because
Totally.
I think that would be really, really interesting for all of us. And look, for those listening, everything measured improves. I mean, it's just when the data's there, it's easier to make good decisions and realize where you're weak and where you're strong. And I think it's a great service, Leighton, to our industry.
Hey, well, it's our pleasure. And, and we're not doing it alone. We've got a lot of great partners like yourself. And, when you go to that landing page, you'll see that there's a lot of partners. There's a lot of people who've locked arms together to make this happen. And so we may have thrown the party, but there's a lot of people bringing food.
Yeah. Perfect. Well, thank you again. And we look forward to our next conversation.
Wonderful. Cool, Leighton. Thank you very much. You guys, hope you enjoyed the podcast. We will see you at the next episode, and check the notes below. Learn all kinds of cool stuff about Leighton. See ya.